Welcome everybody to this H3D Foundation webinar. This is our last one for the year and it's one that I'm particularly looking forward to. This topic is really something that we're trying to nurture within the GCADA network and find our way into in kind of every opportunity that we have. So I think this webinar is going to really feed into our knowledge and understanding of how to do that. But what is it all about? So let me introduce our speaker. Today, we're really blessed to have Carolyn Hall with us from LifeArc. So Cali works at LifeArc as Alliance Manager in Global Health, bringing extensive experience from the Novartis Foundation, where she worked on strengthening health systems and developing community health models across India, Vietnam, Cambodia, and sub-Saharan Africa. Prior to this, Cali spent more than 25 years in the pharmaceutical industry, first in Europe and then across Asia and Africa, focusing on international access to medicine initiatives in low and middle income countries. She also founded her own health consultancy to gain new perspectives and support projects with product development partnerships, NGOs, and global health institutions such as WHO and GARDP. Cali has always been deeply passionate about improving outcomes for patients in LMICs, advocating for higher standards of care and working to remove barriers to access. She is particularly interested in feet-on-the-ground implementation, translating vision into reality through collaboration and behavioral change among local stakeholders to achieve lasting impact. Cali holds a Master of Public Health from London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine and a master's degree in forensic science and clinical genetics, and has extensive experience managing programs in infectious diseases, non-communicable diseases, including cardiovascular, diabetes, and oncology, neglected tropical diseases, and rare diseases. After spending the past 22 years living and working across Asia and Africa, including India, Hong Kong, China, Japan, Singapore, Uganda, and Rwanda, Cali has recently returned to Europe. So I can't imagine anyone better placed to be feeding this information into our network and sharing her knowledge. So Cali, thank you so much for doing this. We're so grateful to have you. You're also an active member of one of our GCADA working groups, the Patient Advocacy and Community Engagement Working Group. And I know we've been really grateful to have your input and expertise in that. And just one more note on kind of where we're headed with this. So one of the things we're doing with GCADA is trying to see how we can have these touch points with patients. Even though so many of our researchers are in the early stage of the pipeline, how do we keep that voice of the patient in our hearts and minds in a really feet on the ground kind of way? So that's what Cali's here to share with us about. So I'll stop talking now and hand over to you, Cali. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Nicola, and hi to everyone today. Happy Friday. I'm very happy to deliver this talk today for H3D. And I'm really honoured to be part of the working group with Gordon and Arnold and Liesel, etc. Okay. Oh. Sorry. Technical. Yeah. So this is just a few pictures I thought about my experience. Spanning many different countries in many different ways, and as Nicola said, across many different disease areas. And disease areas do have a lot of nuance in there. If you're talking to patients about acute disease or chronic disease or diseases without cures, it's really often a very different scenario. And if you're talking about cancer, access to medicines, it really has can have some very powerful discussions. So here's what I'd like to talk to you about today. I hope to talk for about 40 minutes or so, allowing quite a lot of time for questions. So please get ready with those if you have anything that comes up during the presentation. So I'm going to start with, why is it important to get patient insights? Kind of the role of the groups and how you reach out to them. Who are some of those groups in the areas that we're focusing within H3D, within the GCADA network. And then talk a little bit about patient engagement in clinical trials, which is kind of a new buzzword in the sort of patient advocacy area, but obviously very, very important when we're talking about drug discovery. And then I'm going to go through a few tools, very simple tools to help you get started if this is something new for you. And then I'm going to summarize. So I hope this agenda is going to work for you. So why is the patient voice important? So this is me sitting in a tribal village, actually in India. And these communities have a very high sickle cell anemia rate. So, you know, this is an example of trying to learn what is needed. And, you know, when you're thinking about your asset, how is that asset going to be used or delivered ultimately? So what are the patient preferences? What are some of the infrastructural challenges? You know, how do patients get access to your asset, be it a drug or a diagnostic or a device? And are there any cultural issues, any patient preferences that could get in the way of your asset being used? So that's why, you know, it's really important to, you know, to find out from the patients themselves what it is that you need to do. And in this case, in sickle cell, you know, we were there trying to kind of figure out how best to diagnose patients. And once they're on that diagnostic journey, how and where to treat, where would they actually turn up to on a regular basis? How far could they travel? How do they like their treatment delivered? Are there any, you know, concerns around that? And how best to empower their sort of health-seeking behaviour through awareness campaigns and ongoing engagement and empowerment. Yeah, so this is actually kind of formal definition of patient engagement. I wanted to give you mine first, but you know, it's really like purposeful interactions. So to sort of elicit insights that really enhance the research and improve the health outcomes. And I think if you go through this process, you really start to think all the time when you're doing your research about ultimately, you know, the patient, because that's really what we're all working towards. So who is the patient? And the patient, you know, there is actually definitions of this within different sort of patient organizations that we can rely on. But you know, when we talk about patient, it doesn't actually have to be the final patient. You know, it could be the caregiver, it could be a group of patients, it could be a person that represents the patient voice. And it could be someone, you know, like a patient expert that's you know, even actually been cured of a disease, but is very passionate to bring back the voice and help others to get similar success. And so they fall into a whole sort of realm of different definitions that we definitely title under this patient umbrellas. But you know, it's very likely that you'll sort of need a mix of different types of patients for different activities when you plan your patient engagement. Some task benefit from the input of a lay patient that can cast a fresh, sort of unbiased view on a concept or plan that you want to improve. In other cases, you may need the expert and broad contacts of an entire patient sort of organization and its leaders. Reviewing a protocol or, you know, new guidelines may require, you know, sort of more of an expert view. And what are the sort of landscape of patient organizations? You know, patient advocate, in the sort of area we call it either patient advocacy groups, and I think in Africa more commonly they're referred to as civil society organizations. And a lot of these actually started off in the 1980s with the advent of HIV disease and the advocates that were really fighting to get access to essential medicines, diagnostics, and improved standard of care, because groups were seeing that drugs were available, but not available to the patients that needed them and where they needed them. And since then, many patient groups have evolved in many different disease areas. But the sad thing is that still the majority of patient organizations are small. They're usually not very well funded. Their operations can be quite fragile and volatile. And I think it's important for you to know that when you go in, and I always approach it in a very sort of humble way. You know, you can't necessarily expect the same sort of professionalism and mode of delivery that maybe you're used to on a day-to-day basis. However, I think you can always rely on the fact that in your work with patients, they should be committed and dedicated to the patient's interest. And in all my years of experience, I've never really come across groups that push back if you take interest in learning about their journeys. You know, but you've really got to do it in a very trusting way. Sometimes groups can be supported by industry in part. They should never be wholly supported by industry, because that would be a massive conflict of interest. I guess the ultimate aim of such support is to always ensure that a patient group can become independent and can deliver unbiased input. So I think you know, what you have often in it, and sometimes it's quite confusing to kind of navigate the ecosystem, because quite often clinicians can actually set up the group in the first place and then over time hand it over to patients. But there are usually a distinction between a patient group alone. So I just picked an example. You know, in Nigeria, there's the TB network, but the actual clinician group is the Nigerian Thoracic Society. So we can assume that this is predominantly patients and caregivers and other people. They may well have a clinician there as medical advice, but this group, the Nigerian Thoracic Society, is more medical in focus. So yeah, just to give you some definitions there. So the other thing to consider, I guess, is to bear in mind when working with patients and their organizations is this sort of level of activity. And most organizations start out at the micro level. Some don't evolve further, which is very sad. Actually, micro level organizations are probably the most common ones. In most cases, not necessarily someone, you know, that they're quite rudimentary in nature. So it's hard to sort of form a formal sort of network with them over time. So some do evolve and develop activities at the, let's call it the meso level or even macro level. And these are groups that it's probably easier to work with because they may have specific people dedicated to specific activities that make it easier to reach out to them. Sadly, many organizations struggle with growth due to funding and ongoing sort of support from their members, and especially when evolving out of sort of micro level only, or in this sort of meso to macro level. So what is the role of civil society groups if we sort of try to give it a definition? And this is kind of showing you the whole realm of the role of those groups. And some groups may not have, you know, some of this. So, but I'll take you through kind of best practice in a way. So I guess civil society groups play a critical role in shaping health policies by representing the voice of the communities that are often, marginalized or underrepresented in decision-making processes. They should be advocating for equitable access to medicine, healthcare services and resources, ensuring that health systems prioritize inclusivity and fairness through lobbying, public campaigns and participation in public dialogues. These groups can influence legislative frameworks and international agreements that govern health practices. So their advocacy efforts often lead to reforms and that can really address systemic health inequalities and promote universal health coverage. So by acting as sort of an intermediary between the public and policymakers, they can really translate grassroots concerns into actionable policies, thereby strengthening the governance in the health sector. So that's the first sort of area. The next area is community engagement. I think this is an area in Africa which is really important, and that's kind of the empathetic side of people coming together, maybe with, for example, children that have the same disease. It's so important to have that peer support and speak to people that are going through the same thing as well. And these organizations really mobilize local communities to participate in health campaigns, things like vaccination drives and awareness programs. And they really foster trust, collaboration by working directly with individuals and families, ensuring that the interventions are culturally sensitive and contextually sort of relevant. So this grassroots involvement not only improves health outcomes, usually, but also builds resilience against future health crises. And by creating these platforms for dialogue and feedback, it really enables the community to voice their needs and preferences. So this is a really great area for us to go in at as medical researchers, to find out what is current standard of care, if anything, and how our asset can kind of fit into that journey and hopefully advance that journey in the future. Okay, the next is kind of service delivery, and I would say this is a big example of this in Africa is the faith-based organizations, which often work hand in hand. So they're working in parallel with the government public health systems, but through that sort of faith-based trust to start with, and organizations and events, they can actually, really supplement a lot of what's going on. And if people are going to churches, can they organize a vaccination or awareness campaign around some of those ongoing activities anyway? So their flexibility, I guess, and community-based approach allow them to sort of respond quite quickly to emergencies such as disease outbreaks or natural disasters by really complementing that sort of government support in an established trusting environment. The next element, I would say this is an area that's lacking in most groups, I guess, that are more rudimentary in nature. And that's, this is really professional groups that really serve as watchdogs, monitoring the commitments of actions of governments, really kind of questioning government on their policy, looking at private sector entities and international agencies, and they sort of track what's going on in the area, the policy compliance, to ensure that the health initiatives that are carried out the reporting, audits and public advocacy, they can really promote transparency and reduce corruption in the health system. So I personally haven't seen so much of this sort of thing in Africa, but you know, sometimes in groups in Europe, these groups are really lobbying things like the European Union to get that sort of equitable response to their voice. And then finally, civil society groups are often at the forefront of innovation, developing solutions, and this is again where we can come in and, you know, talk to them around experimenting with new approaches to service delivery, health, education, and community mobilization. And really leveraging that local knowledge and understanding of the resource available. And these groups can often form partnerships with governments, with NGOs that may exist already on the ground, sometimes with private sector actors to really scale successful initiatives and share best practice. So these collaborative efforts can enable civil society groups to get access to funding, to technical expertise and policy support, really sort of amplifying their impact. And by fostering this innovation and building these networks, the civil society groups can hopefully contribute to a more resilient and adaptive health system that can meet, you know, the ever-growing need of their patients. So that's really the role, and I just wanted to sort of highlight. I just kind of tried to think of some, I guess, well-known ones, and pull out some that are relevant, I guess, to the disease area focus of the GCADA network. So AMREF is quite a well-known group within Africa. They're based in Nairobi. Their focus is, you know, as you can see, mainly around you know, care at the primary healthcare level. So we're looking at community health, maternal child health, you know, basic sanitation and hygiene. Yeah, so that's AMREF as an example. And then when we go to more like a disease focused group, you've got Malaria Consortium, and they're more an international NGO across many parts of Africa, focused on malaria, but also linking in with associated disease that are you know, maybe similar sort of malaria symptoms that the patients are presenting with. This is quite a common, quite a famous group, Mothers to Mothers, that was developed in South Africa, and that's really looking at preventing mother-to-child transmission in HIV. And then I just pulled out this group from Uganda, which is USTP, which is focused on TB control across Uganda. And they support you know, kind of more effective diagnosis and treatment at the community level, and outreach support, especially in kind of underserved slum areas. So that's just a few examples. Okay, so how to get started. So this is me, actually. I think this was sitting in Uganda, outside a health centre, and I was working on a project that was looking at introducing a high sensitive malaria rapid diagnostic test into the community, and this was these are community health workers, and we were talking to them about how to implement the testing in the communities, in patient houses actually, and then how we could record those results to quickly get back data to the capital city, Kampala, so that those national public health programs could actually implement action quicker. So things like bed netting and pesticide use, etc., chemical use quicker. So I think what's really important is, is getting that voice early on. And these are some of the guiding principles. These we actually took from a UK body that actually does give some guiding principles on how best to engage. And, I think these are really nice guiding principles on how we reach out with, with respect, with trust, being prepared, understanding your disease area, and really facilitate that sort of equal sharing and flexibility in everything that we do when we engage. So what are some useful tools to start to get going? I think it does vary, and one size does not fit all. For me, I'm very much into more face-to-face. I think seeing is believing, but there's other ways to do it. You could reach out to a group. You could maybe attend one of their meetings. You could reach out through writing. You can do surveys. You could do focus groups. But for me, the thing that really is most powerful is kind of stepping in to the shoes of the patient and actually spending, if they will allow, spending a day kind of really looking at what the patient journey is in the disease area that you're focusing in, and thinking about where your asset is going to fit in to that journey. So I think a big tool that we can all use, and it doesn't have to be super sophisticated, it can be very rudimentary, but just going through the process really helps you understand the kind of plight of the patient. So what is a patient journey map? It's really kind of trying to track that whole journey. So if you spent a day with a patient doing ethnographic research, and or with a community health worker, seeing them on the ground, going around working with patients, how do you then document that in an effective manner? I think it really starts from when a patient first presents with symptoms. What is their diagnostic journey? What is their treatment journey from there on? And if it's a chronic disease, what is their ongoing treatment and adherence journey? And it's very iterative, and you need to go back and forth, because these are not linear in nature usually, and you need to understand all the challenges that are going on throughout this patient journey. This is an example of probably one of the most complex journeys that I ever did at the top, which was a rare disease, but a very long diagnosis, 14-year diagnosis. You can see that this is a very sophisticated map, but it doesn't have to be anything sophisticated like this. I think if you start with symptoms, diagnosis, and treatment, and then you can have very basic maps and just, brainstorm, have sessions and workshops, just using post-it notes on a board. And it's a really useful way to sort of map a blueprint, which then can be added to or validated by patients. And often it's quite nice to do a very basic map prior to going to see a patient or patient group, so that you've shown, an understanding, and then get them to tell you whether that makes sense or not, whether they validate, whether they can validate that your understanding is actually what's happening for them on a day-to-day basis. So very quickly, I'm just going to go through kind of how you could start to go about this. I'll show you some templates that we can share with you that might be useful. You know, I think when you first, you know, get going, decide what your purpose is going to be, what scope, how much time you've got to spend on it, and then, you know, is there much existing data? And I think for the GCADA projects, the disease areas is a lot of data that you can actually access from desk research. So that's the planning stage. Do your desk-based research as much as you can. It might not be country specific or region specific, depending on what your scope is. You know, try and make it as comprehensive as you can, and then start to kind of build your map. And I think, you know, the good thing is to really pull out what we call pain points. You know, where are issues that generally patients may be having challenges, you know, they can be anything from infrastructural to cultural, stigma, financial, you know, all these sort of issues, and try and build out those sort of barriers, moments of meaning, pain points. And also you can sort of map that against the different stakeholders that would be involved. So you can actually look at how, if you introduced an asset, who would you need to influence to make that happen over the long term? And then, you know, you build that map. But I think one thing to really reinforce, it should be iterative, so you can keep going back and refining it and making sure it's up to date. And certainly in the area of medical research, which can take, you know, many years, you need to be re-engaging all the time to make sure that the ecosystem hasn't changed. That could actually change your understanding of where your asset may fit. And depending on the life cycle, this is actually something that we use within LifeArc, but how do you then sort of embed your patient journey mapping process along the pathway within your life cycle for development? So this is kind of in an ideal scenario. I know this may be difficult to slot into your research, but I think it's always useful to be going back and checking if you can. And I think, you know, I think the other thing that's very important is to be always feeding back to the patient group, civil society group that you've engaged with, that, you know, you're trying to help him advance treatment. Things, you know, and things have changed, and it's this two-way dialogue. So it's not you just going in, trying to get information, and then 10 years later you go back again and expect that they're going to be interested. I think keeping that ongoing dialogue ensures that trust, and it should be two-way. So yeah, so that's, I guess, the patient journey mapping. And I just kind of created this actually for malaria. I think we might use this within our working group, just to pull out some of the barriers, opportunities, stakeholders, etc., that you can actually kind of look at along the treatment journey. So again, very simple. This is in PowerPoint. Your symptom onset, the initial sort of health-seeking behavior, diagnostic journey, treatment initiation, adherence challenges, and hopefully in this case recovery. You know, if it's a chronic disease, obviously, you know, this may go on and on. But I think, you know, this is a simple example. You can use icons to sort of identify barriers. Then you can, you know, look at where those barriers could result in opportunities, and then, you know, who are the kind of stakeholders involved. And so this sort of gives sort of examples of how you can overcome some of those challenges. So, you know, if this is too generic and not relevant, you could really hone in on specific areas For example, treatment, I guess, with drug discovery. How is the drug initiated and administered, and where? And also, I guess, if you are looking at an asset that is completely going to change the treatment pathway altogether, you kind of have your patient journey as a static current patient journey, but how you would want the patient journey to look like. You know, a good example of that is if you're going to have a vaccine introduced, and this would possibly change, you know, this would probably you know, prevent the need for ongoing treatment pathways in the future. So there's lots and lots of different ways to look at it. But I can't reinforce enough how going back to the communities to find out if there's been changes is so important, because things can change and research can take a long time. So the other thing to mention is the another really powerful tool in your toolbox is creating patient stories. And again, these can come from the patient journey research or stories that you garner through your engagement with the patient groups. And these, in my mind, these really help to sort of bring those patient stories, journeys to life by personalizing them as well. So you can, you know, you can take an example of a patient or a health worker, give them a name, you know, what are their key unmet needs? What will our work help to solve? And what are the aims, and how will this work sort of change the landscape? How will it change the lives of the people living with the condition? And what are their hopes for the future? And I think this always helps you keep in mind those particular names and people in all the work that you then consider to do. So patient journeys, patient stories, and here's just a few ones that we've been using within LifeArc. This is in AMR. And what we do is we take our patient journey and we look at different challenges. Are there infrastructural challenges, economic, clinical, policy-based challenges? You can, and then you sort of can list out what's going on in your patient journey, and then list out the narrative around the challenges to really understand it. Then you can do another look that is the journey against the different stakeholders, and then put it into this sort of continuous patient engagement. So as I keep on stressing, it is an iterative process. You need to keep refining it, and, you know, continuing to keep that engagement going during the whole process. Okay, so I'm close to finishing up, but I just wanted to sort of reiterate why it's so important for medical research. I hope it's already been a bit clear, but I guess one area, patient engagement, is a new sort of buzzword for getting you know, patients involved really early on. And actually, in some cases, getting patients involved in clinical trials really early on, and making sure the health equity and inclusion is there, so that if a drug is developed, it is it's given access to patients from all different backgrounds early on, so the data is there. So this is kind of the definition, and it includes a spectrum of activities, from sharing information about research, hearing the experiences of individual patients, to working with patients to understand the unmet needs, and involving patient advocates in the oversight of programs. And defining what it is in terms of, you know, language. I think in Africa we use more community engagement than patient engagement. Who are those trusted sort of stakeholders? Are there cultural issues and ethical frameworks that we need to work within? So, you know, it is a challenge. You know, I think in, you know, in Africa, a lot of patients haven't even been given the opportunity to be involved in trials. You know, I think this is a big part where we can really proactively engage with patients and get their input on how to design the trials that's most effective to how they want to receive a standard of care in the first place. And why is it important? You know, I guess I sort of listed out the benefit for developers, for you guys, that you can really see that unmet need more reliably, hopefully faster conduct of clinical trials if you're going to be involved in that, and that the outcomes, the relevant patient-reported outcomes, are actually tracked, that are relevant to the communities, not necessarily relevant to us as researchers. And then the benefits for the patients, you know, is that it's customized to them, and at the end of the day, that's what we're doing all our work for. Hopefully, endpoints are relevant and faster availability of those assets, and again that we have that much better collaborative, ongoing relationship with our patients. You know, in all areas of customer service, we try to respond to the customers, but I think we've always been a little bit behind in the medical field. Sadly, you know, things are evolving and the recruitment and retention challenges have not been great, but this is an area that remains a challenge. We're not finding the right patients fast enough and not doing enough to keep them in trials and offer diversity of trial design. But you know, that I think industry and academia has been trying to improve recruitment for years, focused on traditional techniques. So now we need to sort of turn by looking to really solve those patient challenges by sort of better use of direct patient channels. So things are improving. They could be a lot better, and that's something that's really sort of being worked on. And patients are really being asked to play a larger role in their care. And in most cases, I think patients feel honoured to be engaged in those activities, and of course they have a vested interest to be interested there, to identify trial, to help design the trials that work for their populations and have a dialogue about their participation in the study, and discuss the next steps to treatment after they exit the trial and move to hopefully more ongoing care. But with that sort of improved sense of community within their cohorts. So I'm not gonna spend too much more on this. It is a sort of a new field, and you'll hear a lot about patient engagement in clinical trials. You know, this is something that I think we really need to be mindful of from early stage right through the whole journey to bringing something to market. So I'm going to finish then. This is my sort of last slide. I think right now, and many of us are guilty of this, is that we're focused on our research. We think, oh, we don't need to do patient work now. We can do that later when we've got something more tangible to talk to them about. And the other thing is, how do I reach out to this patient group? This is not my area of expertise. So I think that a lot of us feel like that now, but hopefully through this presentation, I've kind of given you more confidence to get out there, to speak, and truly sort of embed a patient-centric mindset in doing what you do, and you know, not feeling in any way lacking confidence in that, because patients are actually really wanting to be involved in their care. So yeah, and I think, you know, the involvement of while I think you know, it's difficult, but I hope I've given you the confidence during this presentation. And I just wanted to finish here showing you a picture of a film I did a few years ago, where this lady had actually given birth at the side of the road to her 4th child. And we were trying to profile the need to have healthcare, maternal healthcare facilities closer to where she lived. And so we did a whole film around this. So the power of the patient voice is huge. And so please never forget that. And hopefully we can all try and instill a patient-centric mindset into the work that we do. So thank you very much, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Cali. That was super engaging. Pete Gardner, you've written 2 questions. Would you like to unmute yourself and ask them in person? Otherwise, I'm happy to read them out on your behalf, but always nice to have other voices. So Pete, if you are online, please go ahead. Give you a minute.
Hello, thank you. Thanks, Cali, for a fantastic talk. Yeah, I'm interested in how common it is to see the ideal kind of patient journey mapping happening in global health. And is there any kind of, you know, guide about the sort of minimum that should be done at the sort of very earliest stages of R&D? And what are your thoughts on that? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, there is. If you actually Google it, you will see a lot of patient journey maps. I would say the more sophisticated ones are probably in non sort of global health disease areas, and so often you have to sort of take learnings from those and actually adapt to your own disease area. But I think once you actually develop a blueprint, a very basic map, and then you actually go out and maybe do some research on the ground, very quickly your map becomes quite sophisticated. So you know, in the areas that we're working with GCADA, you know, in malaria and TB, I think there's actually quite a lot of information out there. There isn't actually, and we realized this through the working group, there isn't actually any standard maps that we can actually plagiarize. So we actually have to sort of create our own and then develop that at a sort of regional or country level. I hope that answers your question, Pete.
Thank you. Godfrey, go ahead.
Sure, thanks, Cali, for the presentation, and definitely for the rich contribution that you made to our working group. And it's been very insightful, and seeing the expansive experience you had across Africa and the Middle East, India. And I'm just curious to get your insights from the community engagement involvement that you've had involvement in. Will you have an example to see how the evidence you've generated was able to change the mindset of the local policymakers, that is the governments involved in supporting these patients, in addition to what the global community is doing in terms of funding support and that? And what do you see as our general maybe barriers from the African perspective? Because my feeling will be that the field looks a bit more younger in Africa compared maybe to the West. Is that also your experience? And what more could we do to be able to elevate this aspect of community engagement and patient advocacy? Thanks.
Thanks, Gordon. Yeah, I'm trying to think of a good example. I mean, I did do this. I did do this program a few years ago in India, which was in haemophilia. For those of you that don't know, haemophilia affects boys, and they lack factor VIII that allows their blood to clot. It can be very cause a lot of disabilities in young teenagers, depending on the severity of disease. So we worked on 2 projects. One was around trying to diagnose patients, because a lot of patients in rural areas didn't realise what the disease was, because there wasn't a clear diagnostic route. And then, you know, once they were diagnosed, the government said, well, they just have to have sort of standard treatment as and when they have a bleed, which didn't really prevent the disabilities, because the bleed had already happened and caused the harm. The best treatment would be to have prophylaxis treatment, where you actually infuse factor VIII and prevent those bleeds happening overall. And the government of India said, no, that will never happen in India. We'll never be able to implement prophylactic treatment. You know, we developed 2 programs. One was to do family tree tracking in India to actually diagnose those patients, which really worked effectively, because Indian people love to talk and they love to ring up their relatives, and suddenly, you know, the word was out there. And so we had this very good program, which we called the Patient Brother, where, you know, one patient would then look after a newly diagnosed patients and help them to care. So that was on the diagnostic side. And then on the treatment side, we initiated a 3-level program where we would teach moms how to infuse their boys with factor VIII. And they would start in the hospital. Once they graduated from that, we would have classes at the temple. Once they graduated from that, they could actually infuse their boys at home. And actually the program was super effective. We didn't have to do the second temple program, because the mums were so proficient at the hospital level that they were more than capable to do that in the home. And actually we found the least educated moms were the best, because they didn't deviate from the training and try to do anything outside the guidelines. So we were able to prove to the government of India that this was possible. So that's quite a nice example of how you, by engaging with patients, that you can really elicit a policy change. So now prophylactic treatment is available through the public system in India. I hope that is
very good example. Thanks, Kelly.
Super inspiring example. We're really pleased to have some members from LifeArc on the call with us, Kelly's group that she's with, of course. So over to you, Natasha. Thank you.
Thanks, Nicola, and thanks, Cali. Really, excellent talk and really helpful. Just to pick up on Pete's question, really, about, you know, what is there a kind of minimum standard for, you know, engagement and involvement? And I think it's you know, as Cali mentioned, there's guidance out there, but it is very much, I think it can be a bit overwhelming. Some of the ideal examples are, you know, quite complex, and, you know, obviously it requires resource to be able to, you know, make those connections, support communities to be involved. And I think sometimes that can maybe put people off a bit, because I think, oh my gosh, it's this huge piece of work that we need to embed into a programme. And of course, if you can do, you know, that really iterative process and really embedded throughout, like, that is the ideal gold standard. But I think, you know, we recognise that that's not possible for everything. So I guess just an encouragement for people to just, even if it just start small and, you know, see where it goes from there. And I think don't be daunted by you know, some of the more complex examples where, you know, there's lots of kind of engagement happening at different touch points. I think just think about your project, and, you know, where, if we did one thing, where do we feel that, you know, the community engagement would have the most impact, and start there. Because often then, once you are engaged and you have those connections, things will just spiral from there, and then you'll see other opportunities to be able to continue that engagement. So yeah, just an encouragement to start small, start somewhere, and go from there.
Thank you.
Thanks, Natasha. And just to introduce Natasha, who is our head of patient engagement at LifeArc. So she works across all our translational challenges, including global health. So I'm sure she's someone that we can always turn to for support if required.
Thank you. And I think so much of what I'm hearing as well is like, how do we motivate for the resources and the expertise to be able to start these? And I think hearing these case studies and seeing examples of how this can work with some kind of clever intervention, but not necessarily all the intervention at one time. So starting small, as you've both said, can actually have great responses. I'm really inspired for what we can do in GCATA going forward, because we have these opportunities, not all the opportunities, but we can start somewhere, and that's going to be really exciting.
Yeah. So don't be worried. And in most cases, as I said, patients are more than happy to talk and to hear about advancements in their field, even if it's a long way off. It doesn't matter, because they feel it gives them hope. It really gives them hope. So starting small is fine, but keep the conversation going and really elicit trust. It can't just be a one-stop shop.
Right. Okay, I think we're almost at time, so I'll draw us to a close. So it's over to me to thank our attendees. Thank you so much for showing up, and we hope that for those of you who've just joined our series for the first time, we hope you'll be back. I've popped some links in the chat. You can join. You can give feedback on the webinar and suggest new topics or speakers on the feedback form. We love hearing that. And then all our H3D Foundation links, do follow us and connect with us. We'd love to have your active participation in everything that we're doing. And oh, Cali, I can still see your screen, actually. There we go.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's fine. And having thanked our participants, I want to thank our speaker. Cali, thank you so much for giving us your passion and expertise. I think this has been incredibly useful. Liesl, in fact, Liesl's just raised her hand, and it's remiss of me not to say that Liesl proposed you. And so thank you so much for the excellent idea, Liesl. Would you like to say a few words?
Yeah, only a pleasure. Thanks, Kelly. I just actually wanted to check, Nicola, will this recording be made available?
So yeah, we chatted to Cali about that. It needs to just be internally approved at LifeArc.
Perfect.
And then hopefully all our webinars that get approved get loaded onto YouTube for anyone to watch. And of course, we'll be handing it over to the GCATA network with encouragement to view. So we make sure that everyone's on up to speed and speaking the same language.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much, Kelly, as well.
Thanks, Liesl. It's been great to work with you on the working group. Yeah.
Likewise, absolutely.
Okay, thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, Cali. And yeah, wishing everybody a wonderful year end, and we'll see you next year for our next series. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Have a nice weekend.